Okay, so there's a guy who wants me to do a Risei deck, and then there's another guy who wants me to do a Labrys deck. I could do the very honorable thing, giving each of these their own deck, kind of supplementing some of their weaknesses by bringing in some of the strengths from other decks, showing how these can mix into some of the other Persona metagame decks, and just generally trying to bring out the best of both decks in separate videos. Or as always, if you're just here to net deck the deck list, and here it is, please enjoy. All I ask is that you leave me a like on the way out. Although with this deck, I would not recommend it, especially if you're going to a competitive setting. This is sort of like a fan deck. It's actually a theory that I have for bringing these two decks together. People were asking me for Labrys decks, people were asking me for Risei decks, and honestly, I'm getting really tired of doing Persona decks, so I'm trying to get through them as quickly as possible. Labrys and Risei are both green. Labrys only operates on levels 2 and 3, and Risei only operates on levels 1 and 2, so I wanted to see if there's a way I could mix them together. And I came up with this kind of odd theory where Risei can actually make Labrys much more powerful, and that's pretty much what this deck is going to be around. Nobody's going to deny that Shadow Labrys is an amazing card and possibly the strongest one that we got here in the English metagame. Even in the Japanese metagame, it's definitely top 3 for sure. Its main problem stems from the fact that you cannot build a straight Labrys deck. They just didn't give us enough cards because Labrys was only in one set. So we always have to hollow out one of the other deck types and throw it in there. If you want to play Labrys competitively, I still hold up Labrys Yukiko as my personal favorite deck type for Shadow Labrys, although I've also seen a lot of promise from Labtagonist. I'm not going to split hairs. Risei cards are not good. Risei cards are really, really bad. But we've never let that stop us before, and it's not like it's completely impossible to build around it. So let's take a look at what I've come up with. This is Kudou's Labryse deck. Haha, get it? Labrys, Risei, Labryse. Comedy gold. Level 0 has always been a naturally powerful level for the Persona decks, and honestly, this is going to be no different. We're going to be running something a little bit messy, but it's got a couple of really neat ideas that I think we can really build upon. Showbiz People Risei, or Risei the Entertainer as it's known in Japanese, is a card that we never see played. Its main use is making sure that we have King's Games in our hand. I'm gonna level with you for a second. King's Game is not that good of a card, but it does something really quirky that we're gonna try to work with. This card's other effect is that you can rest this, or rest any of your characters really, and start resting your opponent's standing characters. This makes it a really good tech card in the Yukiko decks that aren't pure like mine is. And you can also use this to set up the King's Game card. You can rest your back row to rest your opponent's back row, and all of a sudden you get to put King's Game into your stock, which is really good. General Teddy is normally where we put our Suicider, but we're actually going to be running something kind of risky. We're not going to run the Suicider. Instead, what we're going to do is run General Teddy, so that when he comes into play, we can pay 2, search our deck for a level 2 or higher character, and put it in our hand. The 2 core cards of the deck run at level 2, so playing this card not only thins out our deck, but allows us to get that strategy up a little bit sooner. Since this version of the build will include King's Game, we're going to be throwing Teddy and Yukata in here too. He's a fairly decent level 0 assist because he gives 500 to all of your characters during your opponent's turn, which causes more side attacks and lets you get more attacks off because they can't get over your characters. And if you have one of these chilling in the back row when you play King's Game, then you get the nice little boost of one of your characters getting plus 1000 power, and you even get a couple of them if you have 2 of these in the back row. Finally, we're going to be running 3 copies of the Brainstorm. I normally don't like to run more than 2, but we don't really have anything else to fill that extra spot with. The unique thing about this change deck is it does rely heavily on 2 separate changes, but neither of the changes actually happen from the waiting room. Both of the change targets need to be cards in your hand. So we need to be keeping those change targets out of our waiting room as much as possible, and this lets us do that. The level 1 for this deck is really weak. Risei cannot necessarily hold a level by herself, but we're still going to try anyway. This level should be a nightmare for you, but if you can get through this, then our level 2 is actually pretty darn good, so let's see what happens. Rise and Himiko is our first changer. It changes from a level 1 to a level 2. It should be in the back row because chances are this card isn't going to live if you put it in the front row. It's only a 4000. When it comes into play, you can give one of your other characters plus 1500 power, which can be useful as you can use it to power up the Rise beater that we have, but it's probably not going to be a game-changing effect. Really, we're just keeping it in here for the change. If you can pull off its change, then getting that 7000 here at level 1 is a lot more beneficial than trying to win the game with this 4000. Rise's true self is going to be our main beater. First of all, she has Super Encore, which is always fantastic. Her second effect lets you rest 2 music characters, pretty much just Rise characters. And you can give one of your characters the ability that when it reverses an opponent's character, you can get 1 extra card from the top of your deck as stock. Ironically, not all that good at level 1 because chances are, if this is in your front row, it's not going to be reversing very much. Oddly enough, though, if you get to level 2 and you still have one of these in play, you can move it to the back row, reverse it for its effect, and then reverse another character, and it kind of works out for that turn, although there's something else you'll be wanting in the back row, more on that later. As a beater, it's not all that competent, but it does live for a while, so use this to get as much stock as you can until you get to level 2, because level 2 is pretty devastating. Moving on to our level 2, this is where the main game is going to start. This level features an amazing changer, and also pretty decent back row because we're running Rise, so let's take a look. The main benefit of the Rise engine is Rise and Kanzeon, which can come out at level 1. It has a climax combo. When you play full analysis, all of your characters get plus 1000 power, which is... 1000 power to all of your characters is never bad. Its main effect, though, is you can pay 2 and rest this, and then put the top card of your opponent's library into the waiting room. And if it's a character, all of your opponent's characters get minus 2000 power for the turn. Honestly, in conjunction with its first ability, if you can pull off the climax combo and also this effect, it's pretty darn good, especially if you have 2 of these in the back row. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but if it's past level 1, you want this in the back row at all times. It doesn't matter what else you had in the back row, move that to the front, start suiciding it off, and keep these in the back row because this is part of our main strategy. We're running the level 2 backup because we don't have very reliable assist at level 2. We need all of our characters at level 2 to stay alive because we want to be able to keep up with our opponent, and a lot of our strategy comes from having these level 2s. That's why running this is a lot more powerful than running like the free 1500 at level 1 or something. We don't care about level 1, we care about level 2, and this helps get around the fact that we don't have reliable assist from Rise, which, being somebody who played the game, feels really awkward to say. During our opponent's turn, our front row is helpless, but with this, we can mitigate that a little bit. Okay, I wanted to save this Labrys for last because I'm going to talk a lot about this Labrys, I just know it. This Labrys is a monster. Let's break it down, shall we? You can pay 3 and send this to memory the second it hits the stage. It's kind of a good thing and kind of a bad thing. It's good because it means you don't have to wait for like the encore phase or the draw step or something really dumb like that. As soon as this hits the field, it can go into its level 3 version. This is sent to memory, which doesn't really matter, and we'll get into that in a second. But this goes to memory, and you put the level 3 in play, and the level 3 just stays in play, which is weird, and you'll understand why in a sec. 3 is a little bit costly, but honestly, pulling this strategy off is so important that we should have been gathering stock up until now anyway. We've also got plenty of things to help us get stock along the way. Now getting on to the last part, during your next turn, after you use this effect, you can take this card back out of the memory and put it in any slot on the stage. So not only does it change into a ridiculously powerful level 3, but unlike most change targets, this gets to come back into play alongside its level 3 change counterpart. I seriously don't even have any words for that. It's just such a good engine, and it's one of the best things to have come out of the Mayonaka Arena set. If they had actually continued and made more Labrys cards, Labrys waifu decks would be the greatest thing on the entire planet. Speaking of which, this is it. So as I was saying before, there's no argument that Shadow Labrys is definitely one of the best cards in the Persona set in English, and definitely in the top 3 in Japanese. Also, I have to say its Japanese name is way cooler than its English name, the Bullish President of Massacre. We've got a lot to cover, so let's go over this step by step. First of all, when you play it, you can heal from your clock, and it even works with the change target because it plays from our hand when we're changing. Its actual ability is you can pay 1, and when you are battling against a level 2 or higher character, that becomes reversed. If you have its climax in play, you can choose to pay the cost and take one of your opponent's level 2s and put it into the clock. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for level 3s, but it's still ridiculous. One of the main things about this card is you want to have it reverse a level 3 so that you can get rid of a level 2 or lower. Because if you get rid of a level 2 and your opponent has a level 3 in play, you can't choose it as a target. So if you reverse a level 3 and your opponent has some level 2s in play, then you have full advantage of its ability. So let's get over uses, shall we? First things first, it gets rid of characters with Encore. If your opponent's using something really silly at level 2 that has really good Encore, well, it doesn't exist anymore. Okay? 2, it is now in the clock. It doesn't go to the waiting room. It doesn't go on top of their deck. It doesn't go back to hand. It goes straight as direct damage. Here on level 2 and even on level 3, this is pretty much a game winner. Can you imagine just getting 3 of these out on the field, playing the climax, and then just sending all 3 of your opponent's front row to the clock as damage on top of the damage you're dealing from just attacking? That's not a pretty sight. It's especially powerful because you can do it all on level 2. And finally, if you're getting rid of one of your opponent's front row characters and sending it to the clock, you're opening up a space for one of your other characters to attack through to. Let's say you have to attack with a level 0, like maybe you moved one of your Teddy and Yukatas out to the front row or something, or for some reason you have a level 0 in front and it has to fight a level 2 opponent. Well, if you use Raging Bull of Destruction, step over something, and then send that character's battle opponent to the clock, then all of a sudden that character can just attack an open spot and deal even more soul damage. This card's just fantastic, and it's a really good addition to just about any deck. So the reason I'm trying to get this to work with Rise is I've come up with my own combo. Like, this doesn't come from anybody's deck. Nobody's ever actually tried this in Japanese tournaments. I'm combining the ability of Rise with the climax combo of the Bullish President of Massacre. If you use Rise's effect, you pay 2 and you rest her, and you discard the top card of your opponent's deck. If it's a character, all of your opponent's characters get minus 2,000 power, which makes it a lot easier for Shadow Labrys to step over things. Like I said before, we don't have super reliable assist, so this is kind of the way we're going to deal with that. If your opponent does have something that's too powerful for Shadow Labrys to deal with, then you can use a couple of Rises to just get rid of up to 4,000 power from your opponent's side of the field and then have the step over something. Because your Climax combo only costs 1 and this deck is so eccentric about getting stock, you've actually got plenty of stock to work with, so you don't even have to worry about it. Okay, let's take a look at our event. Like I was saying before, we don't have any change targets that go straight from the discard pile. All of them come from our hand. So we can use this card to pull any of our change targets, either the level 3 Shadow Labrys or the level 2 Rise, out of our clock, put it in our hand, and then just clock the top card of our deck. As many of you can tell, this is not a good card. It's really not that good at all. It's got so many problems. First of all, it costs 1 stock. Like, what are you doing spending 1 stock on something like this? Its second problem is your clock is not a very big space. Like, at most, you're going to have 6 targets to choose from. When you're choosing from your deck, you have like 20 targets to choose from. When you're choosing from your waiting room, you could have up to like 40 targets to choose from. The clock is just so limited. Like, really, the only good use you have for this is clocking maybe like a Shadow Labrys to draw the 2 cards at the beginning of your turn, and then playing King Game to get it back. But now we get on to its final problem. If the card that you clock from the top of your deck is a Climax, that is a huge fail. I mean, if it's not, you can argue for deck thinning, but if it's a Climax, then you just hurt yourself really badly. So the Rise that combos with this card, the level 0, It combos with this in the way that you can rest your back row to rest your opponent's back row, and then after that, if all of your opponent's standing characters are completely rested or they just don't have any standing characters, this card becomes stock, which isn't really a plus because, you know, you kind of gave up one stock to play it in the first place, but what do I know? Overall, we're doing everything we can in this deck to make it a playable card, but it's just not that great. Teddy and Yukata makes this a pretty good card, though, because you pay the 1, and you give one of your characters plus 1000 power, and this can become stock, and you can get one of your Shadow Labryses back. So that makes it kind of good, I guess. These are the two climaxes we run. They're both very eccentric about getting us stock. Full Analysis gets us one stock when you play it, and Asterius has the effect where if you trigger it, you can put this card in your hand and just put the top card of your deck into stock so you don't lose anything, but you're also not stocking climaxes, especially not one as important as this, which is very important for our climax combo. Gold bar triggers are just really good. They're really, really good. Alrighty, so on to some strategy. When you're redrawing your hand, ideally you obviously want a bunch of zeros, but you also want to try and keep one of the Rise level 1 changer in your hand. More than one is overkill, but try to keep one of those in your hand and try to get the rest of your hand to be level zeros. It hurts a little bit to say this, but if you don't have any level zeros, then go ahead and get rid of your Shadow Labrys and your level 2 Rise so that you can get some. Eventually, if you're running 4 of each, you should be able to hit them again. At level 0, you don't have a reliable way of taking care of characters. Your opponent is going to be able to beat any of your characters, but you can also kind of make level 0 Suiciders useless, so that's kind of cool. There's not really a whole bunch I can say here. Use General Teddy as one of your main beaters, and even use the Yukiko as one of your main beaters and try to get as much stock as possible. You're going to have to side attack a lot, but just bear with it. At level 1, your entire priority should be setting up your Rise change. Use King's Game to dig anything out of your clock that you might need later, like the level 2 change target, the level 1 Rise changer, or pretty much anything else that has to deal with your change targets, and ignore everything else. Getting off the Rise change is the only way you're going to have a decent beater at level 1, so try to do it. If you cannot do it for whatever reason, just use Rise True Self to stall and use that to gather some stock and get some attacks in while you're waiting. Most decks don't have a reliable answer to this deck's level 2, so just get your opponent as close to level 2 as possible. Don't focus too much on trying to level them up. You're not going to be able to step over very much, so don't try to control the field, just try to control your stock. At level 2, priority is on getting Shadow Labrys into play. By this point, you should have one Shadow Labrys and one Confrontation Labrys in your hand. Get that off now. Like immediately, as soon as you hit level 2, the earlier the better, get off Shadow Labrys, and then just start wrecking through your opponent's field. This is especially potent if your opponent's field is still filled with a bunch of level 1s, because level 1s cannot do anything to Shadow Labrys. There's not a single level 1 that can stand even close to Shadow Labrys. Ideally, you'd like to get 3 Shadow Labryses off, and I know that's a little bit, like, too much to hope for, but if you can figure out a way to do it, then do it. Try not to play Confrontation until you have a Shadow Labrys in your hand. It is not a very good beater, and we don't have reliable assists to back it up. Once Confrontation comes back into play after being in memory, you can use that to attack open spots, especially attacking open spots that Shadow Labrys provides you is a very good strategy. In your back row, whatever you used to have in the back row, get rid of it. All you want are the Rise level 2s, and you want to be using that effect pretty much all of the time. Like, you want to save a bit of your stock so that you can encore and stuff, but for the most part, as soon as your opponent starts dropping some level 2s that you don't think you can deal with, start using that effect so that you can deal with them. Your entire strategy right here at level 2 is make sure your opponent never has a field to play with. At level 3, our game plan's pretty ordinary. If you weren't able to get 2 Rises in the back before, try to do it now. If you weren't able to get your Shadow Labryses off at level 2, then you should be able to play them now without having to do the change. The one big problem is level 3s that can gain some kind of power, like Saber or Madoka, are a huge problem here because they're gonna just completely destroy Shadow Labrys. Shadow Labrys is not as potent at level 3 if your opponent is playing level 3s. If your opponent's playing level 3s and you're able to keep a pretty nice field up, then don't forget to just use Rise's effect. Use Rise, start knocking down their power, and start forcing them into getting rid of their Encore stock. If they're dumb enough to keep any level 2 or lower characters and you happen to get the climax combo off, you've pretty much won the game, so you know what to do. And I think that's pretty much it for the deck. If you enjoyed the deck profile, then please leave me a like. Those things really do help me out. Leave me your thoughts on the deck in the comments section below, and leave me your suggestions on what I should do next. Keep in mind, I am not taking any more Persona requests. I'm going to do the trial deck, I'm going to do a protagonist deck, and that is it. And finally, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudou news. Until next time, Weiss fans.